All right. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see all of you here today. Let me just get my screen set up really quickly. And hopefully at this point, you can see a slide that says working in our virtual world, strategies and tools for people managers. Let me know in the comments if you see a slide. Okay, perfect. It looks like people are seeing a slide and you can hear me. So let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elisha Corpus. On behalf of the officers and Board of Trustees of the People Management Association of the Philippines, or PMAP, 2020 PMAP President Luisa Mila Echevarria, and Executive Director Renee Hiner, we would like to welcome you to today's webinar brought to you by the Asian Institute of Human Resource Management, or AIHRM, the training arm of PMAP. Special thanks also to AIHRM President Lucy Tariela, officers and trustees, and to the PMAP professional staff for making this online learning session possible. I'm so glad to see you all today. Thank you so much for attending, and let's go ahead and get started. Just to quickly introduce myself, again, my name is Elisha Corpus, but it's a very hard name to pronounce. So for today, kahit hey, okay lang. So what do? I am a consultant, a learning designer and facilitator, and a certified transformative coach. My purpose is to guide individuals and organizations towards defining and creating their impact on the world. So right after my undergrad in UP Diliman in psychology, I moved to the US to get my master's in human resource and labor relations. I've always been fascinated with how organizations work and how different people with a different set of goals get together towards common objectives. And that's why I love being with PMAP here today, because I'm sure all of you are pretty much fascinated also with that organizational aspect of work. So after my master's, I was fortunate enough to work in Microsoft's Global Learning and Development team in Seattle, Washington. Here, culture transformation was the big initiative. I got to work on training programs and resources for a lot of people all over the world, and it was very good to see a company transforming at such a huge scale. And then in 2018, I decided to move back home here in the Philippines because this is where I'd really like to work. Now I do my own practice as a consultant, learning designer, and facilitator and coach. And I work with different companies on topics like culture transformation, leadership, learning and development, team development, and strategic HR. I'm looking forward to also getting to know all of you as I get to know more of PMAP and attend more events. So I'm sure we'll see each other at some point in the future. For today, here are some ground rules. Okay, I made my volume a little bit louder. Hopefully that helps. So our first ground rule, and we set this because this is how we will interact with each other this afternoon. So number one, listen to understand. There's a lot of topics that we will cover today, and a lot of people would also share in the comments or maybe go off mute even. It will be very beneficial if we all try to listen and really think about what's being shared and how it applies to our own teams or our own practice. Next, talk to share. This is a little bit of a different webinar because we are asking people to have some participation. You'll see later as we go through the webinar, there are some parts where I will ask you to maybe type in the comments or go off mute if you'd like to share your opinion. And I'd love to hear from you. Next, ask to learn. Like what we all experienced 2 weeks ago, working from home or working virtually is a bit of a different way of working for a lot of us. And so we're all in this together, just trying to navigate this new space. We're all learners, and if you have any questions, feel free to type that in the comments. I'm looking at those questions. If it's related to the topic I'm talking about, I'll go ahead and answer it. But if not, and I don't answer your question, please feel free to bring that up again at the end. So may Q&A naman tayo later at the end. And then lastly, check for insights. We're going through a lot of topics in 2 hours, but hopefully try to pace yourself and really think about how is this applying to my role as a manager? how is this applying to my role as an HR person? Okay, and so we'll do our first check-in. Why do I do this? In general, especially when you're in a virtual setting, it's important to get people interacting as fast as you can. So for us, we'll do it through a quick check-in. And I'd love to know, how are you guys so far? It's been quite a ride since 2 weeks ago. And it's good to sort of see and level set where we are, how we're feeling. So we are going to use the Zoom poll for this. Jeff, our friend from IT, will help us set this up. So please, Jeff, you can launch the poll right now. All right, so in a while, you are going to see a poll launch on your screen. So just hold on for a bit. All right, so what will happen in a while is a window will pop up in the middle of your screen and it will be a poll question. There you can click and then the answers will be tabulated automatically. I see some people are starting to answer in the comments. Yes, I'm glad you're fine. I'm very good. We just had lunch, so I'm not very hungry. Okay, yeah, keep the comments coming. I see someone's hungry. Oh no, I hope you got to eat lunch. Hold on, I'm just checking on our poll very quickly. But so just in case we don't get to use that today, here's it what it looks like is, as a host or as the maker of the meeting, you have the capability to use a poll question. The thing with Zoom is you have to go to the Zoom website, go to your account settings, and then load up the poll there. It's only after loading up the poll that you can access it on your Zoom meeting. And then once that happens, as the host, you can see the answers automatically filling. And it's an easy way to get to know your audience or whoever is talking. Okay, so maybe we can move on without the poll, but it's good to bring that up, even though we had some technical difficulties today. It's good to bring up, oh, there we go. We see a poll. Thank you, our IT friends. So what you're seeing on your screen now, I'm sharing the poll results. If you're the scheduler of the meeting or the host, you can see people answering that. Okay, so hopefully that's something you can figure out and explore later. Just go to your own Zoom accounts. Make sure you turn on the poll before you can start answering it. So I will end the poll right now and we'll move on to the next part. Why did I ask you to do a poll? It's because in this whole 2 hours that we'll be together, we will have those interactive parts, different ways that we will try to get our audience, our participants working with us and giving us some answers. And so by the end of the workshop, our goal is that, number one, we would have gained perspectives on how to set teams and individuals up for success in this new way of working. Number two, identified some strategies that I can use for my teams and my own work from home practices. Number three, experienced examples of online tools and platforms to support virtual work. You already did some of that a while ago. I see some people have done the poll and some have not, but the poll is one example of that online tool. And then lastly, we would have shared our own top tips and learned the nuance from our fellow learners. So hopefully we'll make this a space where if you have a tip that you can share, you can just put that in the comment or go off mute and everyone else can learn from you. We'll go through these objectives again later and just see how well we did against them. And here's another interactive part that I'd like you to try out. So, getting to know you. Please go to www.menti.com. You can use your phone. So, pwede sa phone or pwede rin if you're on a laptop, you can open a separate internet browser. So, just go to www.menti.com and then a screen will pop up. Use the code 965944. I will stop sharing my slides right now and I will move us to the Mentimeter. Okay, so what you're seeing now on your screen is Mentimeter. Mentimeter is a tool that's available online and it's for free. So what happens is once I load up a Mentimeter question, it'll give me a code. So for example, for our case, the code is 965944. You give this code to your participants, and then once they log into Mentimeter, they put that code on that pop-up window. When that happens, they can then answer whatever question you present. So for us, for example, are you a manager of a virtual team or an individual contributor working virtually? And it looks like, yeah, medyo mabilis mag-answer mga tao. Good job, guys. So for about 94 people, most of you seem to be individual contributors. So we're at 56% individual contributor. I ask this question because the way you implement your work from home guidelines or specific tips might be different if you're a manager who's taking care of other people, or if you're an individual contributor who's trying to build your own work from home practices. So for today, we'll try to cover both in context. If you're an individual contributor looking to develop your own skill or routine or whatnot in terms of work from home, and if you're a manager who wants to develop your team's capability to do virtual work. Okay, so it looks like most of you have answered the Mentimeter. I'll go to the next question right now. So you should see the screen on your browser or on your phone change to the next question. The next question is, what's your business size classification? And for our people tuning in on Facebook or YouTube, you can also go to Mentimeter. Your results will be flashed here too, even though you're not in the Zoom call. So why do I ask this question? It's important to know how your business or how your organization is implementing work from home. What we know is for maybe bigger business, for the large corporations with 1,000+ employees, your guidelines for work from home will probably come from like a center source of excellence or a central team working on those. And then if you're a small company, maybe a part of the micro or small industries, then probably you have to make your own guidelines and share that with your team. It's a little different, but at the end of the day, the message here is no matter where you get your guidelines or if you're the one making it, as a manager, it's your responsibility to make sure your employees understand that guideline and they know why you're doing virtual work and what the strategy behind that is. So for 148 people, it looks like most of you are from medium-sized companies, so 46%. So let me quickly go through the chat window. Do we get modules for this webinar? Yes, so you will get a folder of resources that I will share later. All right, so it looks like most of you have answered this question. Let's move to the last one to get to know our audience. So again, your screen will change, and this question states, rate the statement based on how it applies to you. And just do a quick rating so we can see where we're at. So while we're waiting for that, let me explain a bit about why I like using Mentimeter. In Zoom, you have polls, and definitely when you're in a meeting and you don't want to leave the Zoom environment, then you can use the polls that are built within it. What else will have polling capabilities? I know Skype, for example, will have that. Your Google Hangouts, I think, will have that also. Or Microsoft Teams will also have polling options. But I like Mentimeter because it's a bit more dynamic. There are more options in terms of the kinds of questions you can ask. So for example, just in our 3-question set, you were able to go through a multiple choice, and you were also able to go through a scale, which is what you're seeing now. So if you want to play around with some other kinds of questions, then Mentimeter might be the tool for you. Okay, so let's look at our question. It looks like in terms of comfort, it's about at 4.2%, which is pretty good. That's towards the high scale of confidence. So that's good news, because that means you guys have been using these virtual tools. And hopefully after this webinar, it's more of enhancing what you already know and putting a context towards it. So, okay, let me end the Mentimeter. Thank you so much for participating. Hopefully, now that you've experienced it as a participant, you can then also use it with your own teams or your own trainings. So I will now switch us back to our presentation. So we go to the very meat of all of this. Let's talk about strategies and tools to make work from home a success. It's good to ground ourselves in terms of what's happening globally and what's the trend there. So let me share some statistics with you. In 2018, an article that CNBC, so it's a news station in the US, they published an article about this study from Switzerland. So a company called Zug, which is a Switzerland-based service office provider. What they did was they surveyed 18,000 business professionals across 96 different companies. They found that about 70% of these professionals, they work from home at least 1 day a week. And then out of that pool, they found that about 53%, or that's roughly half of the population, they work remotely at least half of the week. So you can see it's not just a 1-day thing that people are working from home. Some are actually choosing to work from home for most of their week. Another relevant study that might be interesting for you is this one from 2019. So some high-tech startups, they surveyed about 1,900 remote workers in the US. What they found was 9 out of 10 of those remote workers plan to work remotely for the rest of their career. It sounds like if you go remote, you never go back. Siguro kasi there are benefits to it, right? Some of the benefits that are very commonly stated are, number one, it helps with balancing family life. So in the States, for example, where I used to work, we did have a lot of work from home arrangements, and a lot of people availed of that. Most of them were moms or dads who had to pick up their kids, or so they can save on daycare, they would just keep their kids home. That's one of the top benefits of a work from home arrangement. The next one is, especially for people who maybe have like more creative types of jobs, or their jobs allow for not very strict productivity rules, then work from home is okay for them because they can set their own routines and try to create a space and an environment where they can really optimally work. So those are just some of the benefits of a work from home arrangement. In my personal experience, if I could just share, so where I came from in Microsoft, we were allowed to work from home no matter how many days in a week. And we didn't have to ask for permission for it. We just had to make sure that we can take whatever meetings we needed to and do the work we had to do if we were at home. And so for me, living all on my own and not really having any help around me, it was very useful to work from home because I could get the things I need for my life done. So for example, if it turns out that I need to go have a doctor's appointment or something like that, then I could work from home and not really worry about not being productive, or being seen as someone who's absent all the time. So that's just personally how it has worked out and benefited me. This one is my favorite statistic. And so employees who worked from home were 30% more efficient compared to those who are in the office. This is from a Stanford experiment in 2015. I'll give you a little bit of a background. A group of economists, so these are economists and psychologists from Stanford University. In 2015, they went to China. They studied a company called C-Trip, which is a travel agency company. What they did was they divided a group of people in one department. Half of those, they could work from home, and then the other group, they had to stay and work in the office. After a few months, they looked at productivity rates. Surprisingly, it turns out that the people who worked from home were actually more efficient. And why was that? It's because they had less sick days, less leaves, and in terms of how many calls they get to do, like per minute or in a certain span of hours, they actually did more calls and more effective calls. So overall productivity was higher. This is a notable study, and a lot of people cite this because it's one of the very first studies that experimentally looked at work from home. So very interesting to find that out. And then one of the last statistics that I like is from the same Stanford experiment, they found that about 9% of employees who worked from home were more engaged than their in-office counterparts. A lot of people worry that when you're working from home, it's hard to reach out to that employee, or it's hard to have contact with your company. But what this study says is there are actually ways for a company to make sure they're staying in touch and staying updated with whatever is happening to that employee. As we can see here, it looks like working from home or working virtually is a concept that's already being used and widely applied in the global sense. The thing is, it looks like in our country, it's something that's not yet fully maximized or fully utilized. When the COVID-19 quarantine measures happened a few weeks ago, it seemed like a lot of companies and a lot of people scrambled to get their virtual work arrangements done. And so why am I sharing with you these statistics, right? If it's different from what we're experiencing. I hope these statistics can comfort you in some way. Maybe it's a little bit new for us here in the Philippines, but around the world, a lot of people have tried it out and it seems to be working. It did not disrupt their work. It's just a different way. And so hopefully this can kind of comfort you and help challenge you to see this as an opportunity for learning a different way of working. So with that, let me pause a little bit and I will just look at the chat window because I see some questions in here. Okay, and yes, we will be sharing slides and resources later. Okay, so with that, I want to recognize that this might be a new way of working for a lot of us. So I'd love to hear from you. What are your concerns with a work from home arrangement? And please comment those in the chat window. And you can start doing that right now. Yes, so slow internet connection, definitely one of the concerns. That's actually why I like to use Zoom, because Zoom actually works with low internet bandwidth. The other video conferencing tools are great if your team is already, like you know who's in the team and let's say you're using the Google Suite, then Google Hangouts might work for you. Or if you're using the Microsoft Suite, Microsoft Teams might work for you. But if neither of those applies, then I would strongly consider Zoom because it works in low internet bandwidth. All right, I see some of monitoring outputs and agreements. We'll talk about that in a bit, so hopefully you'll get some answers. I see a lot of people are saying high expectations. Yeah, and that could be true because we're all pushed into a different way of working. So the expectations might have to be level set again so we can understand what is the right set or level of expectations. Yeah, definitely the use of internal tools, so giving people access, privacy rules, that could be a concern. Yes, juggling household chores, especially for our parents out there who have little kids who are not in school and are also at home with you. All right, thank you so much for sharing some of those concerns. And hopefully what we'll do throughout this webinar is we can address some of those through the strategies and the guidelines. So with that, I want to show you this work from home strategy. It's a 4-point strategy. Later, I have some more specific guidelines and like detailed rules for you, but I like setting it up in terms of strategies first. Strategy gives you the overall direction. It gives you this overarching theme of what am I using work from home for, and why am I doing this? What is it that we're trying to get at? So number 1, we want to build trust. Number 2, we want to empower our people. Number 3, we want to support them with the right tools, with the right infrastructure. And then number 4, we want to always talk and be connected with our people. You'll keep on seeing this slide because we are going to go through each strategy one by one. So the first is to trust. We always want to communicate the why to build trust. It's a little bit of a different environment that happened for us because we were forced to do work from home. But that doesn't mean that you cannot put a why behind it. Even though we all had to do it, as a manager, it's up to you to message the bigger picture. So let me give you a way to message that bigger picture. You can look at it from the concept of a high-performing team. Because really, at the end of the day, I'm sure we all want to still be high-performing, still be a productive team that gets your deliverables done, no matter if you're working physically or if you're working remotely. So what makes a high-performing team? Let's go through those different elements. Number 1, members know where they are going. They have a North Star. So alam nila kung ano yung goals that you have to hit. And it's not just that. Members also know why they are moving. It's not about everyone walking towards the same direction because that's not enough. So people have to know why are they walking in the first place. And then number 3, members actively create psychological safety in the team. Psychological safety means that people are not afraid to make mistakes and are not afraid to ask for help when they need it. So let me ask you, just a quick little survey here. Which one do you think is the most important element that makes a high-performing team? So let me know in the comments if it's 1, 2, or 3. Oh, okay. Very cool. Very different answers here. So let me share with you what we know from research. Of course, every single one of these elements are very important, but we also found that it's number 3. It's psychological safety that can make or break a team. The term psychological safety has been around since the 1990s, but it only became really, really famous again at around 2017 because of Google. So Google had this project called Project Aristotle. What they did was they studied all the highest performing teams in their companies. They wanted to know, like, bakit ang galing nyo? What is it about your team that's working really well? So at first they thought, maybe these teams hired the best engineers. Maybe they're the smartest in the company. And then they also thought, maybe this team has the best leaders. Maybe the leaders are very clear. They're very trustworthy. But what they found was, it's not that. It's actually the ability of each member of the team to create a psychologically safe space. So it's when team members are open to vulnerability, when team members are secure enough to talk about what they're learning and the different mistakes they're making, And then it's also those same team members trying to intentionally pull the learnings from those mistakes. It's very interesting because we know that Google is an innovative company. And what this tells us is maybe a requirement for innovation is psychological safety. And I bring that up because I think about a week ago, I was in a free webinar from a Harvard professor. Something he said was, maybe to get out of this, like this crisis that we're in, for businesses to get out of this, maybe what we need is a model on innovation. Because the solutions that we have now, they don't really apply. This virus and the effects of it, these are things we have never gone through before in our history as humans. And so maybe it's innovation that we need. I remember that a lot because it makes me connected to psychological safety and that need for teams to be innovative together and to be vulnerable together, to go after mistakes together so that they can create a psychologically safe space. So for us as managers, as people in HR, when we talk about working from home, it's not really about pressuring people to do as you have done in your physical workspace. Or it's not about telling people that, well, now that you're at home, maybe you can do more or you can be more productive. It's taking a step back and then framing it in terms of where are we trying to go? We're trying to build a high-performing team. How do we build a high-performing team? It's when we're creating psychological safety. And now that we are in a very challenging time in our businesses, I'm sure it's the perfect opportunity to start creating psychological safety. So that was our first strategy. It's really understanding the why and communicating that to start building trust. The next is empowerment. We have to spread empowerment and not fear. Where am I coming from when I share this? When I started doing my free webinars about virtual work and working from home, the number one thing I heard a lot was, how do I track productivity? How do I make sure that my people are working and not just, lazily watching K-drama at home? And to me, it's really about maybe we have to shift that mindset and that perspective. Maybe instead of being afraid that our employees are not working, how do we message it in a way where we say, this is an exciting new responsibility, an exciting new way of working for all of us to figure out. And you're empowered to figure out how you can contribute to that or how you can make your own routines in terms of working virtually. So maybe it's about shifting that mindset versus sticking to the fear that people won't be working if they're at home. And to do that, here are some guidelines that could hopefully help you out. So these are some guidelines for a successful work from home arrangement. As you'll see here, these are a combined guidelines for managers and individual contributors so you can see them in context with each other. In the resources folder that I'll share, the one for individual contributors and managers will be separate, so it can go into more detail. The very first thing that you have to do is, again, communicate to build trust. Explain the context, which is what we did earlier in the psychological safety part of this webinar. And then next, explain the why behind your thoroughness in implementation. A lot of employees might think that you're micromanaging them if there are so many rules and so many guidelines. A way to combat that is to explain to them why you're being thorough in the first place. So maybe it's because once you have set up a lot of these agreements, then things can just run smoothly as you go along. Next, understand individual realities. Very important, especially in our time now. So first, find out about the person's working situation. Do they have a designated workspace, for example? Do they have little kids that they need to tend to? Do they have to do all the cooking or the cleaning in their house? It's very important to understand where the person is coming from, because that's one of the first things that you can do to build trust And also, it's one of the first things you can do to understand how can you set productivity guidelines for this person? How can you give them realistic deadlines, realistic tasks that they can go after? And then next, check for the right equipment. This is a little tricky because we were all just pushed to work from home. This is where I'd like to bring the concept of accommodations and inclusion. So maybe some of your employees were forced to just use their own laptop, and their own laptop doesn't have as many capabilities as a work provided one. Or maybe some people don't have a work phone that they can use all the time. The ideal scenario is for everyone to have the right equipment for their work. But now that we're here, we can't go back and do all of that. So what we just have to do is make sure that we're checking people regularly. Are their computers still working? Do they need programs that are not in their personal laptops? What can your office do so you can maybe pay for whatever program they need or share payment plans and whatever that is? So these are things that you have to talk to your employee about. A lot of these will sound like they apply for beginning to implement work from home. And that's really where a lot of these guidelines will work out perfectly. But I would encourage you that now that we're in the middle of our quarantine, right? It's week 3 of our community quarantine. Now that we're in the middle, maybe you can use these guidelines as a way to evaluate how well are we doing in terms of our work from home arrangement. And then once you evaluate that, then you can, moving forward, give the support that your people need and maybe restructure the work so that you can make it work for your team members. In your resources folder later, and yes, you will get modules for both managers and individual contributors. In your resources folder later, what you'll see is a spreadsheet where it will be an evaluation form that as a manager and an individual contributor, you can work together to fill out that evaluation to see where you're at. And this will just be evaluating against the most important items or aspects for virtual work. Let's move on with the guidelines. So number 3, have a conversation on work expectations. Evaluate working hours so far and adjust if needed. I know most companies, they set a working hour, so like 8 to 5 or 9 to 6, para it still feels like you were in the office. I would encourage managers that if your company is not very strict with work hours, try to check in with your employees if that's something that works for them. And then if not, and you have the capability, adjust if needed. Another way you can do this is by reflecting on your work styles and communication preference. For example, I know a lot of managers who don't like getting a call immediately. They like getting a text first, asking if the employee can call them. It's things like that that seem so basic, but a lot of miscommunication and annoyance can be saved if we're very clear about these things up front. It's also important to maybe encourage people to talk about these preferences with their teammates, just so that everyone can have a smoother work environment. And then also identify some strengths or interests that might be useful. I'm sure in your teams, you can find people who are very used to Viber or Telegram or all of these chat platforms. And so maybe you can tap into those natural strengths and interests. Maybe that team member can be your tutorial person or your go-to person to teach you all of these new tools. So it's just a matter of finding those people and helping them be empowered to have that responsibility. Next, check on the basics like access to company intranet, permissions to files or folders that are essential to the person's work, inclusion in relevant communication channels and chat groups, and list of contact details of team members, managers, important services like IT for tech help, or your HR representative. Why do I still bring this up, even though we're already in the middle of our working from home arrangement? These are very, very detailed information. And we find that when managers are so busy, when team members are so busy, you tend to forget these details. But it's a good opportunity now that we're in the middle of our quarantine to think about what are those files that maybe if I had permission from the very beginning, I would have just worked really, really fast and really smoothly. It's evaluating that, maybe making a list of it so that you can document it and then go after getting those permissions. It's a lot of work upfront, but I promise you it'll help you just work faster in the long run. Next, assess or reset your agreements on measures of productivity and success. So we're here, right? This is one of the biggest concerns a lot of managers have about work from home. I would suggest that make sure you clarify deliverables and time frame, and it's all written up very clearly so that you and your employee understand that. So for example, maybe your agreement is to have a set of tasks done by the end of the week. What are those things? And it's not just what, but how are they going to go after those things? What is the process that they'd like to implement or to try out? This is very important because when you're working virtually, it's quite hard to track productivity. A lot of it will fall on communication. It's about making sure that your employee and the manager are very well connected and communicating as much as possible. Another tip here is make sure you set how you will update your manager on your progress. For example, does your manager want a weekly one-on-one conversation? So it's a 30-minute weekly meeting. Or do they want an email update on a Friday where you'll make a list of everything you've done for the week? Either one works, but what's important is the manager and the direct report, they know that that's what they're doing. For example, for me, back when I was working in the US, my manager was actually a remote employee. I was living and working in Seattle, Washington, and my manager lived all the way in Minnesota, which is like the other side of the country. And so what she did was every week on a Wednesday, we would have a 30 to 45 minute chat that we already pre-scheduled beforehand. To me, I can speak from the perspective of an individual contributor or a direct report. I loved having that weekly one-on-one with my manager. It's because I got to tell her what I'm working on, and also if there's something that's blocking me from pursuing my other work, I easily was able to ask her for help or ask for support. It's also nice because the worry that a lot of people have is manager visibility. That maybe if their manager can't see them working, then the manager might think they're not doing anything. If you have these weekly touch points, then that fear won't be there anymore because you can be sure that your manager is seeing your progress. And then another tip here is talk about what productivity is for the deliverables given to you. My definition of productivity might be different from my manager's definition of productivity. And so it's up to both of you to talk about that. What does productivity mean for you? Is it a certain set of tasks, or is it different tasks from different projects that you've got to do? It's talking about that will clarify for you how you can measure productivity. And of course, the most important tip, I think, is as much as possible, let's try to remember that outcome-based work is the goal. That's where we want to go. Especially in the virtual way of working, you cannot track people's tasks, like every single step that they do for a task. There are programs that you can use, like for example, I know of one called Time Doctor, where you can even see screenshots of what your employee is working on. So you can go that way, but for a lot of the work now that requires judgment, that requires a lot of thinking, outcome based is still important, because at the end of the day, maybe I can get the job done in an hour, or maybe it's 3 hours. But what matters is that I get to deliver what I promised I would work on. So outcome based work is the goal. Next guideline is, it's not too late to clarify some of your team's norms. And as a manager, it's your responsibility to start those conversations about norms. Some examples are, number one, what is the expected response time in emails? So very interesting here. I saw a study last week that the average response time people expect in an email is actually 4 hours. And for about 30% of the population in the US, they expect emails to be responded to in an hour. So I don't know about you, but for me, that's crazy. I cannot respond to emails in an hour all the time. And so what this tells us is, as a manager, maybe set that standard with your team. For example, you can say that respond to emails in 24 hours. If you need more time, then just send an acknowledgement and tell the person that you will respond as soon as you can. It's that simple, but it's about creating that agreement that everyone knows. Another norm that you can set is, how do we use our team chat rooms? Very important. I don't know about you, but for me, I'm already getting a bit overwhelmed sometimes because I'm in so many chat rooms. And because of these newsfeed type of formats, there are some important messages that you tend to miss if you don't scroll through every single message. So for your team, just make sure you're setting some guidelines around that, like what are allowed messages, or maybe just set up a separate chat room for random texts so that the important ones are all collected in one place. Another good norm that you can set is, every when do we have our team meeting? What are the essential topics that we can discuss? It's good to have your team meetings pre-scheduled as far back as you can, especially when people are working virtually or working from home. They have to know when they need to log in, turn on their video, and be with their teams. So the more you can set that up front, the better chances you have that everyone will actually attend. Another norm you can set is, what is our escalation procedure if someone needs assistance? It sounds pretty basic, right? That if you need help, ask for help. But especially when you're working on your computer and you can't see your colleague, like they're not your seatmates, it could be a bit hard to ask for help. Especially what we know in our culture, right? I know a lot of people would start by saying, I'm sorry to bother you, or I don't want to disturb your time. I'm sure you're working. So it's usually how we start our conversations when we ask for help. When someone is there physically, it's easy to do that. But when you're doing it through a computer or through your phone, it's a little bit harder. So just set some guidelines around that. Like, if you need to ask for help, are there specific people that you need to go to first? Or are there specific documents or instructions that you can read first? It's instructions like that that can help make it easier for your team. And then, of course, as the manager, make sure you're setting some norms on how they can contact you easily. So for example, if you have some calendars, like common calendars, it'll be easier because your team will know when you're busy or when you have another meeting. But if not, then you just have to set the expectation up front. Tell your team where they can message you easily. What do they do if it's urgent? Do they have permission to just go ahead and call you because it's an emergency? It's things like that. And then we're down to our last two guidelines. Again, you will have more detailed guidelines in the resources folder. I like this guideline because it's about recognizing people for their efforts and achievements in this new way of working. We forget to do this a lot, especially when we're all busy and stressed out. But one of the best ways that we can learn is by pointing out the best practices that people in our team are doing and then dissecting that behavior so that other people in the team can not just copy it, but build on it. When you recognize people for their efforts, it reinforces that idea that we have to be constantly learning about working from home, and we have to adjust our practices along the way. And lastly, constantly ask for feedback to improve on your work from home practices. As a manager, use your other managers in your organization because maybe they have some practices that you can implement in your own team. And just as with any other program or any other change management that you've had before, it's very important to get feedback on your work from home arrangement. Try to evaluate it against some standards and then see which aspects you could tweak or improve for the most impact. So that was a lot of information that we just covered on guidelines. Let me pause here a little bit. We have a 3-minute break. During this break, what I'd like you to do is start thinking about what is the number one thing I'm learning so far? And then number two, what is one practice I will apply immediately with my team? So just think about those very quickly. You have about 3 minutes, and I know PMAP has some announcements for you. So I will stop sharing my screen right now, and I will see you after 3 minutes. All right, so hopefully you have some insights that you can share at this point, and later we'll ask for those learnings. But for now, let me present my screen again. Okay, so just give me a quick confirmation, please, if you can see my slides. Perfect, okay. So we'll move on. Again, just to set us and frame our learning journey here. So our number one strategy is really building that trust. Number two is through the very detailed guidelines we looked at, we can set things up beforehand so that people know the agreements they have to work with. They know the norms that are set and the norms they need to work with. And after that, because that's already all set, then they're empowered to have their own routines. They're empowered to take responsibility over their day and how they can make working from home work for them. Our third strategy is to support. Support the desired behaviors using the right tools. Why do I say that? And let me know if you have the same experience or have had the same experience. I've seen a lot of companies, they would say, okay, we need, for example, we need a tool to be able to chat with each other and work together. So they would buy something like Slack or something like Microsoft Teams. And then after 6 months, they find that no one uses the technology. And they wasted so much money buying it because no one's using it. That's actually a common story for a lot of organizations. It's more common than we think. What happens there? It's because you bought the tool thinking that the behavior will follow. But what we know is that doesn't always happen that way. We have to know first, what is the exact behavior that we're trying to change or modify or create, and then find the tool or the intervention that will support that behavior. Here's a little process map for you that maybe you can think about. When we try to choose the right virtual tool, think about the end goal first. What do you want to get after you implement all these tools anyway? The next thing is, think about the behavior that you want to exhibit. How do you want people to use that tool? How do you want people to work towards that end goal? Number 3, so now you can look at what are the different set of tools that can support those behaviors. Just look at everything that's widely available to you. The good thing about our modern world now is it's quite easy to look for a list of tools out there that can support these behaviors. And then, of course, against that list of tools, consider what are your team's unique needs. Not all the tools will apply to the specific situation or the specific concern of that team. And then, only then, do you decide on a tool to use, because you've already considered these 4 other options or these 4 other criteria. And of course, you have to always build feedback on usage. Ask people maybe after 3 months is one of my recommendations. After 3 months of using tool, ask them, how is it going so far? What are the highlights that you like about the tool? What are some lowlights that prevent you from doing your work properly? I'll give you an example just to illustrate it a bit better. So for example, the end goal is for the team to create a PowerPoint presentation that will be presented at the end of the month to the rest of the company. That's our end goal. The behavior that you want are, number one, collaboration, and number two, for people to communicate better. So that's our behavior, like in this next second step that we talked about. The tools that are available are Google Drive, Microsoft Teams, and Dropbox. These are all tools that are file sharing tools, and they have collaboration capabilities. But looking at our team's unique needs, right? What is the team currently using? Let's say the team is already in the Microsoft suite. They're very used to products like Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, Microsoft Outlook. And so when it comes to deciding what tool to use, maybe it makes sense to use Microsoft Teams because you can easily integrate it into the other products that the team is already using. That's an example of how you can go through this process and evaluate very carefully what tool works for your team. All right. So that said, I know that a lot of companies did not have enough time to invest heavily in solutions or virtual solutions. But what I want to tell everyone here right now is it's not about the most high-tech tools. It's just about looking at what are the basic things you need and making sure that's set up. What are the basic things you need to be able to work virtually? So for me, there's 3. Number 1, video conferencing. And what I mean by video conferencing is a way that you can meet your people and talk to them while seeing them on camera. In terms of choosing a video conferencing platform, I would suggest that you have to choose something with polling options, with a whiteboard, and something with the capability to share screens and do annotations so people can collaborate and draw on their screens. The next capability you need is to be able to share documents with an ability for real-time collaboration. So examples are your OneDrive, where you can share links and then people can work on the same documents. Your Google Drive is also something that's very popularly used, even outside of the office. This is important because you want to prevent the back and forth sending of Excel spreadsheets or Microsoft Word documents. When that happens, there's a bigger risk or a bigger chance of data privacy issues coming up. There's a higher rate of mistakes when you send back and forth. So having just one document posted and shared somewhere through the cloud, one document that everyone who has the permission to can edit, that will help you control for those factors. And then the third capability is really chat. Chat, and someone in the comments already mentioned this, chat is actually the fastest way to get in touch with your team and with your teammates. So making sure that there's an ability for your team to chat with each other, that's one of the best things that you can set up right now. Again, if there's anything that I want you to take away from this, it's really that having low-tech solutions is not an excuse for collaboration and communication. It's just about being smart in terms of the tools you use and the capabilities that are available to you. There's this concept called digital transformation, right? And I'm sure a lot of you in the industry have heard of that a lot so far. What we want to encourage here is for everyone to have a digital transformation mindset where you don't need the best tools. It's about using what you have, making it work for your specific needs, and thinking of a virtual solution that will make things easier for you. In your resources folder that I'll share later, you'll see something like this. It's an Excel spreadsheet with some columns. In that Excel spreadsheet, you'll see on the very left column are some of the most common behaviors that managers and teams like to do with their teams. And then from those behaviors, I have some suggested tools for you, a description of the unique qualities of that tool, and the link to either download or try out using that tool. I will provide this to you later because then I'm hoping it'll make it easier for you to think about what tools are available out there that you can use. So with that, we are almost at the end of our strategy. We started with trust, brought that into empowerment. So it's translating that trust into actions. We brought in the concept of support and reinforcing whatever trust and empowerment you've been able to give. And lastly, it's talk. We have to talk constantly about the experience. We have to always be connected with our team, especially now that we are not physically together. So here's another interactive part for you. It's quiz time. So again, I hope you are loving Mentimeter by now. Go to www.menti.com and use the code 647076. I will type the code in the chat window before I exit my slides and show you the Mentimeter screen. So it's 647076. Okay. So just hold on here a bit. I am scrolling to my Mentimeter. And I'm just waiting for, let's get this to 75 participants who are in. Let me start the quiz right now. The first person to get it will get the points. So the question is, blank percent of remote workers say that their arrangement causes loneliness. So let's see, time's up. Ooh, okay, so a lot of you said 15%, but as you can see here on your screen, the correct answer is actually 62. So 62% of remote workers say that their arrangement, the work from home arrangement, causes loneliness. It's very interesting because that's something I'm sure you're all starting to think of at this point. It gets a little lonely when you can't see people physically. Those 62%, they say that it's because of the social isolation that they feel loneliness sometimes. 62 is a pretty big number, right? And it's interesting because even though we know that people could be more productive when they work from home, there's also a higher chance of loneliness and social isolation. And so what do we do? What do we do to combat that? There are ways to build your team virtually and to still stay connected. Number one is you can try to schedule weekly or bi-weekly check-ins with your team. I would say this is especially important at this time. A lot of emotions are around the air. A lot of people are feeling very tired because working from home is a different set of skills. We're dealing with a global crisis, so it's very understandable if people are feeling anxious. There's a lot of worry around us. So it's especially important to set aside time to check in with your team, just see how everyone's doing. Some suggestions that you can talk about with your team are, you can include a debrief of everything that happened to them in the past week or the past 2 weeks. You can share about what projects or tasks you've worked on, and to avoid it from being an updates meeting, which not everyone likes, you can also use it as a way to share lessons learned. It's not just about what I did, but it's also about what I learned from what I did. Another topic you can bring in is to talk about projects or tasks that will happen in the next week or in the next 2 weeks. And then think about what support would you need. You can also encourage everyone to actively think through how can I support that other person who's sharing about some tasks they will do in the next week. And then another thing you can do is you can encourage virtual team lunches or breakfasts or coffees. It's funny because a lot of us think that it's hard to eat together or be together when it's virtual, but at least from my experience of having a lot of virtual teams, I actually feel as connected with them as my in-person physical teams. It's because we really set aside time. We would block our calendars and schedule meetings to have lunch together or have coffee together. And then when we do that, we make sure to turn on our cameras and we just converse as if we were together in person. I think it's those kinds of intentional connections that you set up, that you schedule, those can really contribute to keeping everyone engaged. Another thing you can do and you can consider is maybe pairing up people with those they haven't talked to a lot. So you could do randomizers online, just put in everyone's names and then pair people up. That's a very easy way to do it. And then another way that you can create that connection is by playing games with your team. So for example, on a Friday afternoon, just to de-stress together, you could play some online games on apps like charades or heads up. So these are very common games that a lot of people would know. I saw a question earlier about, so how do you encourage virtual work for millennials versus maybe some more tenured people? One of the best ways to do it is through introducing new technology by games and just having that casual, informal setting where people can explore different technologies and see that hindi pala ganun kahirap. Like, it's fun. It's a new discovery. That's one of the suggestions there. Another way that you can build your team virtually is having a share your new workplace introduction. So it's kind of like showing people, if you're comfortable, showing them where you work, what's your situation like. It doesn't just build trust, it also gets people to know you better. And it encourages that vulnerability that we talked about in psychological safety. It encourages that knowing individual realities so people can set expectations. Another thing, and I love this suggestion personally, is you can insert short introductions to meetings, like a show and tell for people who have pets. One of the easiest ways to get everyone to react and smile in a meeting is by showing a pet. So this is like in over 100 of my virtual meetings. Everyone just loves it. So it's pets or babies, I should say that. Another tip is to assign responsibility to lead meetings or activities. Virtual meetings are a perfect way for you to start having people experience being a leader in a meeting. They can learn facilitation skills, and because you are in a computer, it's very easy to privately chat that person, maybe give them some tips if they're faltering along the way. That's something you can play around with. And if you remember our strategy number 2, which is empowerment, assigning people some responsibilities to lead activities or lead meetings, that's one of the easiest ways you can message and practice that empowerment. Next, create a separate chat room or channel for fun and learnings. If you remember our guidelines earlier, we said that you have to make sure that important information will get to your people when they need to see it. But you also don't want to lose the fun sharings. You don't want to lose the memes and the jokes. A good way to solve for that is to just create a separate channel. And lastly, you can set designated times for brainstorming and creativity. So for example, in my old workplace, we would do Friday fun clubs. Like one Friday every month, we set aside like an hour. Anyone in the team can bring in a problem or an issue they're facing. And then for that hour, we would hack on that problem. We would give different suggestions, try to think out of the box. We would be as creative as we possibly can. What I like about Friday Fun Club is it's still related to work. I mean, it's helping someone get through a work hurdle, but it's also giving people a chance to just dream up solutions or to contribute creatively in a way they never have before. That's something to consider. All right, so that was the last of the strategies. Now, just to quickly go through them, because if anything, the most important part of this webinar is really to have a strategy with which you can frame your very detailed guidelines. So again, we want to create trust. You create trust by communicating the why. And as we have talked about, one of the biggest whys that you can go after is psychological safety. Especially in a time like this, if you are able to be a source of calm and stability for your team, then that's already a great way to get them to start building trust within that group. Next, we want to empower people. We're shifting our mindsets from being scared that employees will not work in a virtual setting to showing that this is an exciting new way to discover. 3, we want to support desired behaviors using the right tools. As we have talked about, we think of the desired end goal first, what behaviors are needed for that end goal, and what tools will support that behavior. And lastly, we have to always talk with our team and constantly evaluate, assess the experience and our individual realities. If you notice the first word of all of our strategies, it forms test. One of the most important things to remember in this new way of working is it's an experiment. It's a chance for all of us to test out something new. We can try out new tools like Mentimeter. We can explore different functionalities like whiteboards on Zoom or annotation tools. It's really about trying to be creative and experimenting with what works or what doesn't work for our team. So hopefully you find some joy in that experimentation process. That even though we are in a very stressful situation, at least this is a chance for you to try this new way of working, because we know that virtual work will not go away, even in the global sense. Okay, so with that, what is one thing you will make sure to remember from this webinar? What are those insights that you got? Please comment them in the chat window right now. I'd love to hear about what learnings you're getting so far. Yes, communication is the key. And to test. Yep. Yes. There are tools that you need to take note of. Oh yes, I love that people are learning about psychological safety. That's a very important concept. And actually, even beyond this topic of working virtually, psychological safety might be very interesting for the managers here to start reading up on. Yes, it's a combination of tools and communication. That's an important point, actually. So I didn't see who wrote it in the comments, but if you just give people tools without instructions or without setting up a context for them, then there's a less chance that they will really start to use those tools. But if you communicate what the tools are for and how you'd like to practice the tools together, then there's a bigger chance that they will actually try it out. Yes, all right. Thank you so much for those insights, everyone. And later at the end of this presentation, there's more opportunity for questions. So very quickly, let's just go through our objectives, make sure we got everything right. So number one, we wanted to gain perspectives on how teams and individuals can be set up for success in this new way of working. Hopefully, with everything you've experienced so far, this is something that you can do for your teams. Next, we said that we wanted to identify strategies that I can use for my team and my own work from home practices. Like what we talked about earlier, we have a strategy that will frame everything, and we have specific guidelines within each strategy as your actionable steps to be able to really implement and successfully implement your work from home arrangement. Number three, we said we wanted to experience examples of tools and platforms to support virtual work. Just in this presentation, you got to experience Zoom as a video conferencing tool. You got to see Poll and how it works in Zoom. You got to see Mentimeter. And within Mentimeter, you got an experience of different ways of using it. You got multiple choice questions, you got quizzes, you got scales. So that's something I hope you will be excited to explore after this webinar. And then lastly, we said that we can share our own top tips and learn new ones. I really love that in the comments, there are some people who have shared their own experiences from their own organizations. So that's a good way for us to get to know more and see how these guidelines are applied. I kept on talking about a resources folder. So let me just orient you a little bit so you'll know what you'll get in there. Inside your resources folder, and this is in a Google Drive, first, you'll get this picture of our work from home strategy, which is test. Next, you are going to get a spreadsheet, so an Excel file on setting up your work from home arrangement. This might not be as relevant for everyone anymore because I'm sure a lot of you already have your work from home set up, but just in case, I wanted to include that in there. Number three, you'll see a PDF with the work from home guidelines for individual contributors. So this is a 10-step guideline that you can send out to your direct reports or to anyone who you think will benefit. Number four, you are going to see a PDF of work from home guidelines, but this time it's for managers specifically. Number five, you are going to see another spreadsheet on evaluating your work from home arrangement. This one is for managers. And so what you'll see in there are some of the most common items, most essential items that you need to be thinking about in virtual work. And then you can fill in that spreadsheet with your direct report. There's an instructions part there, so don't worry if you're not getting all of this. And then lastly, you are going to get a quick guide to virtual tools. I see a lot of questions here about other examples or other tools that I can suggest. My suggestions will all be in that quick guide. Okay, so how can you get access to that resources folder? Two different ways. I know PMAP staff, they said that they will be sending that information to you along with a PDF of this presentation. So wait for that if you want. Another way is if you're already on Facebook, which I'm sure a lot of us are, you can check my page, Elisha Corpus Consulting, and I will post those resources over there. When you get the PDF, you'll also get a list of the references. It might be nice to look into this one. So this second one, Bloom, Liang, Roberts, Ying, 2015. This is the Stanford study that I talked about. And with that, we've intentionally built in a lot of time for questions. So please feel free to ask your questions now. If I missed any of them a while ago, I think you can go off mute if you raise your hand, or feel free to put it in the comment section. Okay, so one of the questions in the comment section, what other tools and platform, sorry, no, that's not, all right. So the question is from, hold on, I am scrolling. So the question is from Nico, where do you see virtual training in the future? So actually, I think that we would see more virtual workshops happening in the future. And it's because you don't need the most high-tech solutions to do virtual training. Maybe I'll give you an example from my experience. So in Microsoft, we would do a lot of virtual training because we wanted to avoid traveling all the time. And it's impossible to travel all the time because sometimes we would have simultaneous training and you can't go from Europe to Asia in a day. So what we use is we used Skype for Business. We would just maximize the tools like whiteboarding or like polls so that we can get interactions there. Another functionality that a lot of these video conferencing tools would have is breakout rooms. In Zoom, for example, you can turn on your breakout rooms if you go to your My Account in settings. When you have breakout rooms, you can divide your participants into smaller groups so they can have smaller group discussions. It's because these capabilities are widely available that we can confidently do training online. So I would caveat that and say, in terms of learner outcomes, we know that blended learning is still better than purely online. What I mean by blended learning is there are online trainings that are available, but then maybe it culminates in an in-person one-day training. Or maybe you start with in-person and just have the rest of the curriculum topics online. We know that blended still has the best outcomes. But in the absence of blended, if you really cannot do in-person, what I would suggest is find a way to create a community with those learners. So for example, if you know that people will be in the same group or the same cohort for about more than one virtual training, what you can do is add them to like a chat room or something like a group so that they can converse online. And then as the learning and development person or as the person who's sponsoring that training, you can send out some homework instructions through that online group. You can sometimes like have a schedule and send prompts so that you can create conversation. So in the absence of an in-person training, it's creating that online community that can reinforce your learnings and still help people feel that they're learning from each other. I hope that helps answer your question, Nico, because really virtual training is already widely available. And I forgot the exact number, but I looked this up yesterday. It's escaping my mind right now. Someone computed like the billions of dollars worth of the online learning industry. And I think in about 2015, it was just single digits how much it was worth. But the predicted number for 2020 is about like $36 billion. So it's a growing industry, and I don't think it's going to stop growing anytime soon. Okay, let me look at more questions here. Yes, so okay, there's a question here from Bless. Are we now ready to apply work from home in the Philippines after this pandemic problem? So you know what? My hope is that yes, we can apply it. Because from a sustainability perspective, so let me just share a little bit of the bigger picture here. From a sustainability perspective, we know that work from home arrangements can lessen the traffic and it can lessen pollution because there's less energy spent. In Seattle, they actually ran this study because there's a lot of tech companies working in Seattle, like Amazon is there, Microsoft is there. And so they were able to compute like how much time people spend in traffic or like how much energy we expend or send out in the air. And because a lot of these tech companies have very flexible work from home arrangements, they're able to say that it's significantly different, the rate of like energy expenditure, because companies are able to send people at home. My hope is that after this whole pandemic and quarantine measures, my hope is that companies can see that it's possible. I hope they can see that, look, wala tayong time, but we were able to do it. We were able to implement work from home. And so maybe if we're intentional about it, if we actually assess how we can make it possible, hopefully companies can start adapting it and making it more widely available. Then I have a question here from Louis. We got caught red-handed by the lockdown. Our team has never done work from home. All they have are mobile phones and data connections, or desktop or laptops for some. Are there tools for smartphones that you can recommend? So great question there, because actually a lot of these tools that I suggested in the spreadsheet and the tools that we worked on today, a lot of them are available in your smartphone. So it's very great now that we have these mobile phones with a lot of capability. If you have people with mobile phones that can access these things, then good, because it takes a little bit of practice for them because the screens are smaller, but it's possible. This is also where I'd like to bring in that conversation about accommodations and inclusion, right? So there are people, for example, who their phones will not be capable to do that. And so what can you do to still have them in the team conversations? My suggestion is make sure you know who those people are in your team who are maybe struggling with having the right equipment. And then once you have conversations there, you can set out some arrangements with them. Like maybe if they can't call in because they don't have that capability, they can assign someone to take notes for them. For example, someone can make sure they take note of action items that that person will need to do. And then after the meeting, the arrangement is someone will send those notes immediately. Or maybe if someone can't call in because their phone cannot do that, what you can do is send them the agenda beforehand through whatever means you can, and then get their opinions on specific topics or questions if they have it. These are accommodations that realistically they take up more time because, right, like wouldn't you want everyone to just call in and then done? But the world we live in now is we cannot wish for all that to happen because we were forced to it pretty fast. And so it's really those taking time to make accommodations can help a manager set up that trust from the very beginning. Okay, I have a question here from Teresa, not sure how to pronounce that, but the question is, ideally, how many days should we work from home in a month? Okay, very interesting. Another version of the question, of this question that I get a lot is it more advisable to have a specific work from home day? So let's say you tell all of your employees, we will work from home every Friday. Or is it more advisable if everyone can just work from home whenever they want? My answer is it's more advisable if you have a free rule on work from home. What I mean by that is if people can choose when they need to work from home. So I forgot the specific study on this, but there are some people who say that work from home did not work for some companies because they have very stringent rules around it, or they specify a day where everyone will work from home. The thing is, you have to ask yourself, why are you implementing work from home in the first place? Ideally, the answer there is because you want to make life easier for your employees, because you want your employees to be able to find a way to work and still live their life to the fullest that they want to. Ideally, that's the purpose of working from home. And if that's the purpose of working from home, then it doesn't make sense to just tell everyone we're all doing it on one day. Because what if, for example, your work from home is on a Friday, but let's say your daughter or your son's school activity is on a Wednesday. And so then it defeats the purpose of work from home because you still can't go to the Wednesday activity, even though you have work from home on a Friday. It's things like that it makes it logistically harder if people can just work from home on a day that works for them. But that's the kind of arrangement that will target what a work from home is really for. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so a question here from Maria. Zoom only has 40 minutes free usage. Can you suggest other free video conferencing tools with the same functionalities? You can try Google Hangouts. I think there are some restrictions there too, but that's something you can try out. Right now, because of this COVID pandemic, I know Microsoft Teams is offering a lot of free functionalities, so you can try that out. So at least for now, you have something. But other than that, if that doesn't work out, you can consider maybe using your Viber and just calling each other on video. So it's a very low-tech kind of solution. But my suggestion is, what you can do, if you're using Viber for your video call, for example, you can open up another free whiteboard. So in the Excel sheet I'll send later, you can see examples of that. An example is Whiteboard on Fox. So let's say I'm using Whiteboard on Fox as my free whiteboard function. So what I can do is I'm calling everyone on Viber using video, but we all have our screens open and we're on that link to the shareable whiteboard. So that's a little more low tech because there's multiple platforms going on, but it gets the behavior done. It gets you to the end goal. So that's a workaround that you can maybe try there, Ria. All right, so a lot of questions on, a lot of questions on data privacy, data security. Yes, very, very real issue and concern right there. So what can we do about that? Number one is make sure you're using trusted platforms. For example, your Google Drives, your OneDrives from Microsoft, because these are made by big companies, then more likely you can have some confidence that it's safe. Another is making sure you're setting the right permissions. So even in a program like a Google Drive, for example, you can make sure that if a link is only viewable or editable and only send it to the people who need it. I think especially now when things are moving so fast, it's more of being careful about who you send things to and who you give people permission to. Because even though there are a lot of tools out there that are more secure, realistically speaking, a lot of companies and teams right now don't really have the time or maybe even the money and the budget to go after those solutions. So it's using what you have and being very careful about setting the right permissions. Okay, and then I see people are asking about the PowerPoint and the resources. I think PMAP will be sending them to you, so you can do that, or you can also look at the Facebook page that I mentioned earlier. Okay. What other questions are here? Hold on. So from Janine, any more suggestions for effective virtual activities to continue engagement and connections to employees that work from home and that make the work from home environment more fun, more learning, and more productive? Okay, so some more suggestions are, if you think about the games that you play in person. So I know some teams, they do theme days, so like people can show up in costume. It's things like that that you can also think about implementing in your work from home virtual setting. And it sounds like a lot of these are very like easy, quick hits that you can do like 5 minutes before the time, or they're more visual things, but I can see that a lot of people post these things online, which tells me that they actually enjoy it. So I think if you look for solutions like that are easy and low cost, people might be interested in it. And I think at the end of the day, it's not about always giving people something new. It's about messaging why you're doing it. So for example, if you try out a new game or a new activity with your team, it's about being clear that the goal is you want to build connection. The goal is you want to stay engaged and just be stressed together. Because I think people appreciate the intent more than whatever that activity might be. So at the end of the day, it's really communicating the intent and what you're trying to do. Okay, a question that I'm seeing here is, do you agree that work from home really does not apply to all employees, especially for government employees who are required to be physically present? Okay, I do get this question a lot too. So, in terms of working from home, there really are some jobs that lend themselves better to work from home. I think a common mistake that I see a lot of companies make is they think company wide. So, for example, they think that if the whole company does work from home, then everyone has to do it. Or if a certain job within that company cannot do work from home, then everyone cannot do work from home. And I think that's not the correct approach, because in any company, in any organization, the jobs there are different. And so when you want to apply work from home, you want to look at the nature of the job versus the company as a whole. Look at what jobs in your organization lend themselves well to working virtually. What jobs are hinged on maybe just communication and not really physical contact. So it's maybe those kinds of jobs that you can transition to work from home faster. Okay, I'm looking at more questions, and I think we have more questions that come in through Facebook. So let me just scroll through that really quick. Okay, a lot of questions still about productivity. So for productivity, there are tools that you can use. So like the one I mentioned earlier, it's called Time Doctor. It gives you actual screenshots. But I think at the end of the day, you want to understand what is productivity for the job and what is productivity for the person doing the job. So as the manager, it's up to you to have those communication channels set up so you can both understand what is the realistic expectation. I think, and this is my personal opinion, but in the situation we're in now, I do think we have to be a little bit more forgiving in terms of tracking people's productivity and what they're up to. Okay, looking at more questions here. Okay, I like this question. So from Facebook, Dominique says, how can we foster continued learning in a work from home arrangement? So actually, just from my experience, I appreciate working from home and working virtually a lot because it's very easy to access the tools because I'm in front of my computer. For example, if you're in an in-person setting and you're doing like a collaborative activity, people are in person collaborating with each other. And they're probably using like paper and pens, manila papers, cartulinas, or whatever that is. But when you're in a virtual setting, people are then forced to use tools. So tools and people are working in synchrony together. And I point that out because in terms of continued learning, it's easy to post questions. It's easy to be prompted about new ideas when you're in a virtual workspace. And if people are already used to that virtual arrangement, then they can easily look at what channels are asking me these prompts, or what should I follow in my company intranet to continue getting these learning reminders or notifications. I think at the end of the day, it's about building and practicing that behavior where people are seeking learning and appreciating that if they're in a virtual arrangement, learning can be easily available whenever and wherever they want it. Okay, looking at more questions here. Hold on. Hold on. Okay, some more questions. All right, so one of the, I think, common themes I'm seeing here is how do you convince top management or leaders to do a work from home arrangement? I think the number one thing is really show them the data. So research on what is going on worldwide, and I'm sure even in the Philippines, you can easily look up those statistics. try to look into what is going on in your industry and why your industry needs to digitally transform. If you look up a lot of those reasons and concerns, you can bring that up as proof or as points of information that your top management can consider. The other thing I would suggest, and this might be a bit more unconventional, is to run experiments. So like that Stanford group and what they did, you could try to see like a 1 week or a 2 week experiment where people will be working from home and some people are not working from home. And so it's by having actual runs that you can see what is the behavior and will working from home apply or be a good way to further reinforce and supplement the kind of work that you do. Okay, so another question is, what if you have clients abroad, like in the US and Australia, and the problem with the current setup is that they get frustrated by how slow our internet connection is? Yes, okay, very common, because in other countries, internet connection is something that they don't worry about very much. So I think this is where, as a company, if you are the manager or if you're a leader in that company, it is up to you to set that agreement up beforehand with whoever your contact is with that client company. Try to get them to understand the current situation and the current context that your employees are in. So that's the number one thing someone can do from that top leadership perspective. Number two, train your employees who have calls or meetings with these clients abroad. So what do I mean by that? Give them some guidelines on, okay, what do you say in the beginning of a meeting? How do you set up the expectation that, hey, I might encounter some technical problems or technical difficulties. Please wait 10 minutes if I suddenly disappear. I think it's training people to conduct those virtual meetings that will give them the confidence to handle, whatever problem or technical difficulty or slow internet that they face. So that's another way to go about it. I know it's not a direct hit or it's not a direct solution that will solve the internet connection, but I think a lot of us are not in the position to solve our slow internet connection. And what we can do is create some norms or workarounds that will still help us be productive even when we are experiencing these difficulties. All right, so it looks like we have about 7 or so minutes left. And I will still stay on the line to answer some more questions. Another question I'm seeing here in the chat window is, in this work from home arrangement, is it important or needed to have a daily accomplishment report of staff, or weekly accomplishment report will do? I would say it depends on you as a manager. Some managers might have only 5 people on their staff, and so it's manageable for you to get something daily. But if you're a manager and you have 20 people, I don't think it's realistic for you to get 20 reports every single day. And so at the end of the day, I would say it's up to you as a manager to think about what's realistic for your situation. That's the first tip. The next tip is, it's also about what's realistic for your employees. So for example, if there's someone whose work is, maybe it's more long-term and they're going after like specific aspects or specific tasks within a long-term project, then try to think, is it useful for them to have a daily accomplishment, or will 1 week do? Because they have to start chunking that up pretty well. So it's, again, at the end of the day, it's up to you and the agreement that you set with your direct report. Okay, another question is, can you share a good practice when it comes to flexible schedule while working from home? Okay, I'm guessing it's from like the employee's perspective, so I will share from that perspective. And so when I was an employee, my work from home schedule was very flexible. So what I would just do is, well, number one, I make sure that I tell my manager what's going on with me. And so I would say, hey, I'm working from home today and I'll be online until about 3. After 3, I just have to go to my doctor's appointment and then I'll be back at 7 in case anyone needs me. So it's about setting that expectation, number 1. Number 2 is making sure that whoever I need to interact with that day, they know that I'm working from home and that I'm calling in for my meetings. And then number 3, it's also personally being clear about what I need to accomplish on that day or on that week. So for example, if I already know that I need to email like specific people or I need to be updating a specific report, then because it's a very easily to track task, at least for myself personally, then I can easily manage my time as I work from home. Okay, and so I have another question here. Maybe I think we can do like last 2 questions. So there's a question here about, do you need to dress up if you work from home? So number 1, what is the culture in your company? So for example, if your company on a normal daily basis is really like all suit and tie and everyone has to be formal, then you could guess that in a work from home perspective, they also want you to look presentable. So that maybe that's one. Another thing is maybe you ask. So this is something that now depends on the manager and the team, or if it's a bigger company, whatever rule or guideline they set. Because it depends really on the preferences and the informality or the formality of that company culture. Okay, looking at other questions right here. Hold on. I saw a question earlier about metrics, or what other metrics other than daily productivity tasks can be used. So number 1, again, that daily productivity task is your best bet only if that's your agreement with your employee. Another thing you can consider is once you've set what is productivity for yourself and for that direct report, try to think about what is productivity overall for that team that you're in. And then once you have those standards or those behaviors, try to do like quick surveys or quick polls to see how well you're doing against those standards. It depends, because what do you want to measure in terms of productivity? So I'm sure it's the what's being done, but for me, productivity is also how people are doing it. And so if you want a better picture of your team's productivity, it's about looking at the what and the how and asking questions that can give you answers on both of those topics. And I think PMAP is telling me that's the last question. So thank you all so much for listening to this webinar and for participating. I love all the questions and all the comments that we've been getting. I will immediately post a link to the resources file on that Facebook page. And I think PMAP will also immediately send out whatever resources to you guys. But again, thank you so much for spending this time to learn. I'm enjoying that a lot of you are trying to be the best leaders, best managers, best HR people you can be for everyone in your team, especially at a time like this. Thank you all. Stay safe and healthy. Oh, if your questions were not answered, you can also message me in that same page where the resources will be left. I'm so sorry I didn't get everyone's.